Hey, watercolor students, I want to talk about our next painting project we're going to do, which emphasizes a method called wet into wet. And the idea is that you apply paint to a surface that's already saturated with water. So the paint's going to respond in a certain way and kind of bleed a little bit. It'll have a softer edge to it. So there are a number of different ways you can approach this, and you can try a combination of things, or you can stick to one thing specifically, but I'm just going to show a variety of approaches one might utilize. And so the first approach is with potentially wetting your whole paper. So this, I had this paper soaking in the tub for about 3-4 minutes. So the paper has relaxed, expanded a little bit, and it's nice and wet. And so whenever I put paint on it, the paint's just going to kind of blur. So that's one approach. And I'm just going to start in with that just to kind of show you these possibilities. I would say with this project, we're gonna use flowers as our subject matter. So I found a couple of things here that look interesting, that I'll be working from, and it could be maybe an assortment of images that you take from different sources and put them together into a whole. I want to emphasize the abstract capabilities of this. Think of the flower as a vehicle for your color, to experiment with color and with the wet into wet process. So if it comes out looking, not exactly like this or not exactly like this, but maybe a composite of many things, that's fine. And the other important thing is that I want you to go edge to edge on your compositions, like, have something touching here, have something touching here and here and here. Fill the compositions, not a little thing in the middle, but an overall thing. And as potentially you could substitute other imagery, but we're just going to use flowers because they're organic. There's a lot of they're organic forms. There's a lot of leeway in terms of what can pass for proportions. They don't have to be perfect or anything. And probably the less imperfect they are when you paint them, the better. You can never replicate nature in that way, especially flowers. So make it just a beautiful painting and you'll be fine. And that would mean, really, really exploit color, exploit process, and so on. So I have a wetted paper, and I'm going to start with one approach where we're going to just going to paint onto the surface, kind of just a relative, just one layer of patterns that may be floral, that will just kind of have a kind of organic sense about it, with the idea that later I'm going to come back once it dries and then layer over the top of this existing image that I've painted. So right now it's a little bit too damp. So I'm going to blot it a little bit, just so there's not a lot of standing water. If there's too much standing water, then it's just going to be nuts. And then I'm going to do some kind of background, mixing up some greens here. I'm making an olive green, kind of an earthy green, by just taking this green off my palette, mixing it with a brown, kind of a sepia brown tone and an ochre tone. And then I'm just going to make some marks. And I don't want to make it too dark because I want this just to be a kind of a background that later on I'll be using to layer onto. I just want some kind of a background, just a space. And then um, apply some variance here. This is just very stream of consciousness composing. You can see how the paint's just kind of bleeding. If the paper were more dry, or if the paint were not as liquidy, then there would be less bleed in the color. So let's try this. So there's just not as much water, so the paint doesn't bleed as much. I like that. Now I'm just making these kind of, you know, random marks without thinking too much about what it is. I can always, later on, I can kind of rotate my paper and decide which end is up. I just want a background. And it seems to be interesting to me if there's a darker core to some of these things. I'm just adding some darker spots. They end up looking more dimensional, even if they are abstract marks, if they have kind of like a couple tones to them. And then doing that a little bit more. Maybe some more kind of line shapes for fun. And then some darker cores on those. And I think maybe too I'll throw in a little color, other color, not just the earthy greens, browns, but I'll throw in some other color too. Now, I have an option too of blotting paper. So if I want to just control the migration of that paint, I can go in and do that, and just kind of stop it from going any farther. When it dries, it's gonna dissipate a lot. It's gonna just, it's gonna be really pale. It might seem dark now, but it'll be a lot more pale when it dries. So I'm just kind of slowing down the migration of the paint because I don't want it to ooze so much where I just totally lose the images. There. And then maybe some more vibrant colors, like I'm imagining maybe a field of poppies or something. So I'll just throw in some red, pretty much right off the palette there. Now the plan is that I'm going to come and superimpose something over this top of this later, so it really will be kind of like a background. This is an experiment. If you treat it as an experiment, often it's liberating because then you go, oh, well, this is just an experiment. And then if it's an experiment, I can do whatever I want. Where if it's for real, then then it becomes intimidating. Okay, so now, yeah, I mean, it can be paralyzing, just to feel like, well, this is something and it really matters, it really counts, especially with art. So so just treat it as an experiment. There, a couple splashes, a couple dots on the brush there. Okay, so now I'm just going to put that aside and let it dry. And then I'm going to move on and then talk about some other ways one can approach this. So I'm going to put it off to the side, let it dry a little bit, and then come back later. So here I have, this is a piece of stretched paper. So this is this has been taped down. The advantage of the stretching is that it will dry really flat. No matter what I do to it, it's always going to dry flat. I just got some paint on my board there. Okay, and then I have a little side band here. These are for experiments too. And then this will kind of be my big deal painting. The one that I'm scared to do because it's supposed to be the for real painting. Probably the experiments will be better. So here is one way of approaching um, this wet into wet method, where it's controlled so that you might be you're going to paint wet on to dry, so that you're just trying to, control where you're going. So where the paint is going. So start out by, I'd say don't even draw, just draw with your paint. Start out with some really, really pale water. So then you can kind of see it on your paper. And I'm doing this, it's like a black-eyed Susan or something. Just kind of getting the basic profile. Okay, so then all this is, then I just want to use that paint, kind of fill in a border, so then I have a shape. Get a nice kind of overall puddle going. And I was using, maybe this color was a little strong, but I just wanted to see where my water was. I want this to be a nice wet surface. So now I'm going to come in with a yellow. Kind of drop that in. This black-eyed Susan will be a little bit more yellow, orange there. Fix that. So I'm dropping in this color and trying to let it disperse somewhat naturally. And, even though you're kind of doing this puddling thing, just keep your marks lively. Now, I could, if this were going to be on a white background, well, the yellow doesn't stand out very good. So what I could do is, while it's drying, I could go around with these darker marks. Just to elaborate. So that's a kind of a wet into wet. I'm just controlling where the paint's going. And it, kind of, it serves as kind of like a soft outline while I'm using it. And then it implies some detail that I don't necessarily have to go and render too carefully. So then there's this interesting kind of the central part of the bloom. There's this shape like this. Now I can do this. I can do this. I can do it one time, and I can follow up on it as well. It's often nice to have um, when you're making color, this could be this color, it could also have another color. So I wanted something to kind of read brownish, but be made up out of a couple colors. There. Now, there's nothing to say that I can't come back and elaborate on this. I can do that all day if I want to. Um, but right now, I have this kind of, this nice kind of dispersion of paint. I've controlled where everything's going. And then I can just keep doing that, throughout with additional shapes. Make another one over here. Um, this kind of purple flower. Here's my dirty water. You kind of just let them fuse into one another and then clarify later. Like once this dries, then you come back and make a couple of sharper marks and you're good. So this was purple. So I'm using get some color to make that purple. Using ultramarine blue and this color that is called opera rose to make a purple. And then there's kind of a central, just kind of filling in these colors. And then there's a central yellow part of that bloom. Now I could wait for that to dry. Um, rather than get too specific here, I could just try another one. And try one that's more kind of from the side a little bit. I'm adding a little more variety to this one here. Okay, and then one more blue. So trying to get the the medium, the method to kind of do some of the work for me. Let's try a leaf shape. So maybe there's a leaf shape here. I'm just inventing here. So I'd outline in water, fill it in, and then take some green, modifying the green with more earthy colors, and then just kind of dropping in the color. You can see how this is sort of fading as it dries. So then then I will potentially want to go back and work on that. Just going to do some more green around the edges here. And your technique certainly doesn't have to stay uniform. You can you can switch up. It, obviously the paint's drying, and so I can't do the same thing. Once it dries, I can't treat it in the same way. I'm going to add some dark to that green. Create kind of a shadow background effect. There. And then one final sort of treatment over here. Let's see. Say if you're going from a green to a red or a green to a yellow, something kind of opposite the color spectrum, make sure you clean your brushes really good. And I'm just applying that yellow and letting the colors mix a little bit. There's kind of a darker core there. See what, leave that there and see what happens with it. And then maybe I want to, when it dries anyway, I can go around the edge or whatever. But imagine thinking that you had to do every single little mark on those pistils and stamens and so on. You're just trying for a generalized idea about the bloom. This is kind of mellowing nicely, and then that can go back and kind of play with that. So another approach now, that this is like wet on dry, and I did mention this approach is totally wet into wet. And then here, here's this little plan I was going to do here. This might just be less overall about it. It might just be, applying to a wet surface in specific areas. So I'm going to try something more specific here. So now let's just try something different. There's some anthuriums. I think they're called anthuriums and bird of paradise. I think these are birds of paradise flowers. And so in this case, I'm going to wet an area of paper. And then let it I blotted it irregularly. So here's the anthurium. So I want to paint into a wet surface a little bit, but I don't necessarily want to do it all over. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to be, unlike that very first experiment with the background, I'm trying to be a little bit more specific with my shape. So I'm laying in the shape, I'm getting a kind of like a soft, soft edge, and that's kind of an appealing looking mark. there's the, what do you call it? This pistil or the stamen. I can't remember. I think it's the pistil. It's coming out there. I'm just blotting a little paint away. Worry about that later. And I kind of like that effect, so I'm just going to wet more surface. The other thing you can do is come back and while the paint's drying, you can go along the edge and you can make the edge more blurry like that. And then later, clarify it more. So I'm getting this whole thing wet now, and I'm just going to be more specific about my shapes. So just kind of working on little details within there. So I'll make here's another anthurium. This idea of out of focus just adds a kind of atmosphere, and it can make your imagery feel like there's more than that is actually there, more dense, more full, more like it implies there being more detail without you having to paint it all, especially when you go back and especially when you go back and alternate the focus, like maybe some things, and that's a plan, can have some things blurry and then have some things in more specific focus. So I'm going to do a bird of paradise. Start with a yellow, and then as a base, and then add to that. So here, proportion doesn't matter as quite as much. Just try to get varied types of marks. It ain't perfect. So now this is sort of drying more quickly, and that's just how it goes. And I'm not going to worry too much about being uniform. I can wet the edges if I want. Okay, now I'm going to try some red in there. And here, it's kind of a nice quality. And then there's also green. With the anthuriums. I'm going to go back and add more violet just to make them a different type of red, because that'll be more interesting. So add a few sort of purplish tones in there. sort of like an implied shadow. There. And then, let's see. Now I want to add green to the bird of paradise. That's kind of cool. And then just let it dry and see what happens. And one can always, blot away to, modify, or just let it go. I'm going to let it go, see what happens. Here is like the pistil on the bird of paradise. There's one that kind of goes out like that. And that one goes out like that. And then when these are dry, then I can come back with line and clarify and additional textures. I'm going to take, let's see, I do like a little bit of underlining on that. But, in a flower context, then you already recognize it as, a specific type of flower. So in the background here, well, I see a lot of yellow-green. So I'll bring that in. And I might choose to, subdivide that with more greens. This is a yellow-green right off my palette. And, additional leaf forms. It might be different types of green. And there might be darker greens, like down here, there are darker greens in the shadows and so on. Then I'm just going to kind of leave it open-ended. Now the idea is to follow up with this with additional marks and textures, just to give it, a little focus. So the idea is have it be in and out of focus, so it implies more than what's actually there. So this is drying, and you can see, what would one do to it more? You can go over with additional washes on top of what's there if you wanted to intensify color. You could layer additional forms with this black-eyed Susan. Maybe it's echinacea. I can add more specific yellow if I want to. Layer back into it. And certain things, like I'm just going to let that go, because it's like a sort of a broken edge. It sort of fuses things together sometimes. It's not like everything has to be crystal clear. Here where the paint was kind of bleeding into the blossom. I'm going to just see if I can redefine that edge a little bit. There. I do like that additional color that I brought in there. And then I might choose, to kind of come back with marks that kind of clarify the form, lines that aren't actually there, but that might make it more visible and interesting and in higher focus. One can go too far with that, like you don't want to outline everything. Like this line, I felt like I went too far, so I'm just gonna soften that a little bit. There. Um, yeah, you just, stay out of your own way, and then you're usually fine. Because like needs more. Oops. That was a very clumsy, I was trying to stem. It was a very clumsy stem, so I'm just gonna erase it and then maybe make a stem again. Ambiguity is good in this situation, so it's okay if there's ambiguity to the form. Now I made a stem here. Later when it dries, I can't really do much there, but I could come back and kind of clarify that. And now that I blotted away that paint, I'm going to put a yellow down there. There. Okay. So I'm liking that. And then now for the big show, um, I'm going to want to paint this, and I liked the wet surface. I think what I'm gonna do is just approach it all with a generally like wet surface. So my paper buckles a little bit when I get it wet because I've stretched it. It's gonna buckle less. But if it does buckle, you just kind of go with it. I'm going to try to be really cavalier, meaning uncaring or not cautious. I'm going to try to be not cautious, and when I approach this, because when I am cautious, it shows that I'm scared. Um, so I'm going to try to pretend anyway that I'm not scared to paint this. And I like this. I'm going to go with this. So start out with red shapes. Red and yellow shapes. So here's a kind of coney thing. Kind of channeling this artist who I have shown already in the slides, Raoul Dufy, French artist. And the thing is, you don't have to be perfect. Those are all the coney things so far. And while it's wet, like this is darker, put a little dark in there. You may actually have to re-wet the surface as well, in places. But right now I'm doing this pattern that I can go back and elaborate on. Kind of a beautiful, they're not pine cones, there's a bloom of some kind, but there. And then, so that's all it's all for those forms. And then there's an interesting kind of maroon leaf that just comes right up alongside that. And I'm just, I don't have time to, sit and nurse these things along. I want to move on. So I'm just going to make these general marks. Okay, there's that takes care of the maroon leaf. And there's going more to a red straight off my palette. There's a central red bloom here. I may be completely wrong in my proportions, but it doesn't matter because I'm just trying to work edge to edge. Adding a little red to that while it's drying. It's kind of a mixture of purple and red. And it has kind of a dark shadow along this edge, which I will clarify later. There, kind of a combination, a little bit of openness. One doesn't have to fill in the full shape, and put in a little bit of a few darker kind of violety tones. And there's a central area where there's a kind of a bloom. So I'm just blotting a little bit of color away because I want to show that there's a bloom. So now, and notice that I'm working quickly. I want to make some of the bird of paradise shapes. I think I need to, I have some more. Good to keep your rag over by where your water is to blot. Let's see, now I'm going to do a few more anthurium shapes. Kind of a red bloom there. Looks like my paper has dried out a little bit. So I'm going to go back and just kind of wet the surface a little bit. Selectively. There's even some ocean in the background of my painting, so I might try to put some blue in there, the background of my photo. Okay, so now more anthurium shapes. So here's one. It's kind of like up here. And there's one down here. It's kind of like heart shapes. They're kind of veiny, so they might leave some of these marks more open like that. And then right above it, there's some kind of bloom. It's the same as that. Just make that red, and then here's another anthurium shape over here. And then there's one up here. Kind of leaving a little space for the pistil to come out. And then it's got a stem that's a combination of green and yellow. Just kind of do that. That can be kind of dealt with later. And here it's just pretty much dark. Okay. And finally, the birds of paradise, which are the things that I really want to paint. Lost my brush. Lost my other brush. Just looking for a smaller brush. All right, so then we have one here. Like I said, sketch it out and paint, maybe, because once your pencil is in your hands, and you're just going to get all, tight, and then you won't be willing to experiment so much. Just use your arm, use your eyes. Okay. There, that's good. And then here's another bird of paradise. Kind of coming up. Just kind of painting right through these other forms. And another one goes up here. Scale's a little bit off, but doesn't matter. No one's checking. And then there are these interesting little kind of feathery shapes that come out here when I think that's really what makes it look like a Okay, I had to pause the recording briefly, but getting back to this composition, just trying to create all the shapes and working into the wet paper and um, re-wetting the paper if necessary as it dries out. And so with these kind of stem things, it's helpful to just paint right through, paint right through a form if you have to, knowing you can kind of go back and modify or fix it. That's better than just trying to stop at an edge and pick up at another edge. And so I'm trying to get this elegant, graceful stem on this plant. There. So I think I have mostly everything. The major shapes, I have to do the leaves. And then there's another kind of leaf here. I guess my paper is actually a little bit dry there, so I can soften the edge if I want to. Going to be kind of green anyway. And then you see, it's like having your eyes blurry and you just paint as if everything is blurred, knowing that you'll come back later and put some focus into it. So, it's the first round. These stems are interesting because they're green and they're red and they're orange. They're not just one color. Let's see what else is there. I think I want to start on the leaves. So just some big, very generalized leaf shapes. And I don't have my proportions exactly right, but it doesn't matter. We're after kind of this effect. There's a sort of a seam in the middle of the leaf, and then some shapes. Just try to make, beautiful marks with your brush. I'm noticing there's a shadow here, so I'll just make it really dark. Start out with. And then kind of a palm leaves kind of thing going on. Little shadows on the leaves. If I put a little line around the palm leaf, then it sort of stands out a little bit better. and then they kind of frame everything. I'm taking a green and I'm adding sort of brownish tones to it, earthy browns, which gives it a more, it doesn't look so neon. Looks more naturalistic if I add a more earthy kind of tone to it. And I'm kind of blending the colors together. So my paper's drying a little bit. That's all right. The that kind of like that soft edge isn't happening as much, but I did get a lot of information in there already. This I can take a darker background with this anthurium, so I can define a more specific edge just by making the background a little darker. I'm going to make it a lot darker right now. There, that'll create some negative space. And it's probably worthwhile at some point too if your palette gets to be where it's so dirty and you just got a bunch of mud in there, then that's probably a good time to clean it a little bit. I'm creating a little more little negative space in the middle, background space, so that these the blooms kind of stand out. So you see it kind of coming into focus a little bit. Want to keep it somewhat open-ended, so then that saves me from having to do detail. But I want to, have a few kind of crisp edges and accents like there. And in the background here, needs more green. When you have a dark color, it's a little bit more difficult to paint through something like that, which is lighter. So I am avoiding that a little bit. Just trying to get the paint just to, settle naturally. And here's another thing. Um, it's never a situation where like this is just red, this is just green. Light is shining into this image and it's reflecting color all over the place. So there's even aspects of red in the green. So if I did something like, like this in the shadow, it wouldn't be, it might be the right thing to do because there's, you see these colors circulating throughout the image. It's not just kind of, one color for one object. Your colors reflecting into everything, and that kind of helps. That helps a little bit with the unity. Um, big, there's a split leaf philodendron over here on this side that has these big giant leaves that kind of go like that. If you just convince yourself to fake it, that's the thing, fake it, and everyone will believe, the viewer will believe what you did if you're confident enough about doing it. And so I'm just trying really hard not to care and just throwing the paint at it just to see what kind of result I'm going to get. Um, okay, the green frames it, starting to come together a little bit. It's more dark down there. And okay, so right in the middle, I need more kind of, bulk. Gonna bring the red back. Nice watery strokes. So I'm adding green to that red just to neutralize it a little bit. And also some red violet down there. There's an interesting kind of braided structure to that. I can come back later and work on that. And coming back now, since I have red on my brush, I'm doing a little bit more detail. Like that. And let's see. And I want to do some green. I keep seeing things I kind of want to play with a little bit here. Like there's this shape that I wanted to go back and clarify a little. Just using that red base and adding more to it. You can use white, like this area where I really want that stamen to be more visible. Pistil to be more visible. So I'm using white just to kind of clarify where it is. And then more red. I'm outlining a little bit. Just trying to use a range of reds. You know, the red violet seems to be a really nice color to add to this, to these anthuriums. Like if there's an underside. So you can kind of see how you know, each time one goes back, you're kind of adding just a little bit more information, and then you get these levels of clarity on the individual forms. Like right now, it's like I'm adding these kind of braided shapes into this flower, which I don't know what it's called. So then I'm adding more information there. Each time you go back, you know, there's a little bit more that you can say about it. Here's a situation I you know, I don't have the stamen, so I'm actually going to use, I don't have the pistil, so I'm going to paint one in with white, opaque white. And then I can outline it later. It's kind of transparent, but you know, go back and kind of outline it. There. Add a little white to that one too. All right, so I need a little bit more bulk back here, more green. So a few more palm leaves. It kind of, you know, to paint spontaneously. This is one issue that's sort of hard to avoid if you're trying to paint quickly and with watercolor kind of transparent media. It's hard to always just paint everything in back first. You kind of have to paint the objects in front first and then come back and paint in between the spaces. Um, you know, on a longer work, there are certain hacks for that, but you know, sometimes you just have to do the best you can. And now I'm literally not painting through this because this is too light and that's too dark and it's going to look weird if, you know, I want this to stand out more. So I'm just trying my best to just, you know, paint the shape, stop, and then paint through like that. Doing a little more outlining here, letting the letting the color mix a little bit naturally. That helps anyway with the composition, just to have a little more density in there, a little more bulk. And maybe one more palm leaf up here. All right. Cool. So now, you know, I have some structure, and now my options then are coming back. This is kind of like the central form. These are important too. So it's to my advantage to make these birds of paradise more distinct. So I think the first thing I'll do is revisit this flower and give it more intensity. So a little bit more crispness. There's a shadow in here. I'm going to add some red violet and a little green to it to make it a little bit darker. And then there's this kind of central bloom here that I'm going to kind of try to describe by painting around. There, and I think ultimately some textures. And then also outlining for emphasis. Going for some hardcore Payne's gray now, just to really accentuate the fact that this is my focus. This is kind of the center of the composition here. That was a little dark. So then I'll just go and kind of mute it a little bit. There. Great. And then this anthurium has some interesting markings on it, so that's worth making some marks. Could be a combination of line and some additional washes. Felt like it could use a little more color intensity, so I'm just kind of following these contours here. And when this dries, this little stem dries more, I'll add more to that. There's a little bloom kind of thing here that I don't understand at all in my image that I'm working from, but I'm just gonna try to give it a little more form because right now it's a red blotch. So this may be a mark there, and then some kind of petal-like shapes. You know, I'm taking cues, but I'm not being absolutely literal about it. And that's probably enough for now. There's a little line there. Okay. This could use more, you know, I want everything like super defined, but some things I think could benefit from that. So these little cone-like shapes, I'm just going to come in and make some, they just look a little fuzzy and I want them to kind of come out more. So I'm going to mix up just kind of a neutral brownish type color, and then kind of use some of the original marks I made to give it a little bit more visual presence. Going for a slightly softer brown. There. If I get into too heavy of an investigation of that structure, that's I'm here all night, and that's something that's always something you're considering. How long is this painting going to be? How much time are you putting into it? What sort of information and clarity are you working towards in doing the painting? And time doesn't guarantee, putting more time into something doesn't guarantee that it's going to be any better. But I'd say just putting time into your learning, understanding process, that certainly is important. I'm going to do kind of like a heavier outline, shadowy kind of thing around this, just so that it pops out a little more. There, so visually is coming into focus. Kind of going certain edges that I want to be better. And now my real concern is just dealing with these birds of paradise, because they don't have the same clarity as the other stuff. And so add a little green there. There's this really interesting dark green line on the bloom. It's funny when I do a quick mark, it's more assured. When I do a slow mark, then it's all wobbly. So something I'm paying attention to. This is supposed to be kind of the inside there. On my palette right now, I'm just kind of using up whatever paint is available. Here I'm going to use the negative space to define the edge of that particular bloom. And so putting that green there means I need to put more green down here probably. I think there are more leaves. Well, no, I'm going to stay with my stay with my birds of paradise a little bit. I'm really at the point where I need to clean my palette and get a much cleaner, cleaner take on all of this. I'm outlining with violet right now. I feel like these need to be more defined. That's starting to look okay. Um, anyway, for the assignment, it's just just try to keep a certain amount of chaos going on, and then it'll feel more, it should feel more full as a result. That's just a stem. Here's another stem. And then you always need to give yourself time to absorb and digest what you've done so you can come back, walk away, and then come back and look at it later, because with a fresh pair of eyes, because I know that I'll see something later that I, just am not catching at the moment that might really affect this in a positive way. And I can even put in some blue from the ocean. Ooh. I was feeling like there was too much red and it needed to be countered. So now I'm just kind of bringing in some of that background color, which I think helps a little bit. This color is called turquoise green, and it's sort of an aqua blue, and I'm mixing it a little bit with cerulean blue. Yeah, so trying to create a little chaos in there. And then, so then I can come and pick out some patterns. And I feel like I'm, very close. I want to, clarify a few of these things a little more. Um, and I want to get a little more negative space in here. Get some darks. Sometimes you just have to, work a while to get the color that you want. There, these darker accents put more emphasis on this bloom. I think I like that. And while it's not perfect, I feel like I can live with some of this stuff. I'll just leave most of this stuff less defined. And then in the end, just little sort of additional marks for textures. Since this is a focal point, I was noticing on this bloom, there were these little kind of veiny-like bits. So then if I do that, it allows for there to be, draws the eye there. And a little more dark here. So that stands out a little bit more. All right. And maybe this anthurium, same thing, where I could do like the stem has some interesting little textures on it. It's not really dry yet, so I don't know how wise that is to keep. Okay, so I'm close to giving it up. I mean, giving it up meaning finishing. Just one extra line or mark, maybe. There and here. And I'll still want to come back and look at it again. Just to see if there's something that might bring extra clarity. Don't want to get into too much outlining because it kind of wrecks it keeps it from breathing very well if you outline everything. Kind of just you kind of shut it down often if you outline too much. But probably I want to come back and adjust the colors and add maybe, the reds are awfully similar, so add additional colors or toning that will change those. I'm thinking more purples might be a good thing, and just a little bit less red. So that would be, oh, I know, right here. Taking a blue, making a purple, and I'm gonna go over this. So then these will stand out a little better. And yeah, I think just coming back later then and looking at it. Now, these things I might do the same thing, just additional marks, you know, like maybe here, you know, I put something on, or on the leaves, you know, I put some marks on the leaves so they become a little more patterned. Or in the flower. A little shading. Stuff like that. And then here, you know, edges like I was doing over here. Um, and then finally, something like this, if you just have this kind of pattern, um, just using it as a backdrop and literally just painting right over the top of these things. Uh, I think it was feeling like poppies. So then literally going over with kind of silhouetted shapes, probably darker. So you're just using this, you know, this background stuff as kind of a foil. But the idea would be that these things that you're superimposing over the top just have more clarity and intensity. And this can be definitely can be of an abstract nature. Probably the more abstracted, the better. I'm putting this darker color in so that these will stand out against the backdrop. And I would just suggest, you know, doing these in stages, work a little bit on it, or work in another area a little bit and then come back, take a break, and then look at it again and see what you can come up with. But I kind of like that quality. And also letting things letting forms run together too is good. Okay, definitely really honest to goodness finishing up here. So anyway, trying to rely on these overlapping silhouetted shapes and then using the background as a nice foil so you get this sense of kind of foreground background space. These are in crisper focus and these are in softer focus, therefore you create this sense of space. And then in this one, I think it's to your advantage to make these kind of compound shapes where you're merging these silhouetted forms. I mean, they don't literally have to be silhouetted, but you kind of overlapping, overlaying forms, so you get these, compound shapes with one another. And this could just go on. This is the last one. All right. So I'm going to leave this. I'm going to come back one more time, and I'm going to make um, additional adjustments that I feel like help it visually. Maybe a little bit more texturing, a few more edges, more clarification, but that's basically the process. And I hope it will lead to something for you.